Thank you very much to our technical facilitation team. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for your attendance with us for this side event number 8, Deep Dive Mercury Free Pacific Campaign. I am Emile Ndututuranga Mbulavinaka from Fiji and Talo Falava from our SPREP team in Samoa. I'll be your moderator for this session, and before I introduce the session, we will see a short video clip.
こんにちは、松永幸一郎です。私たちはジュネーブで開かれた COP1 と COP3 に参加し、水俣病の被害の深刻さと水銀を規制する必要性を訴えてきました。今、新型コロナウイルスが世界の脅威になっています。私たちも健康に不安があり、思うように行動することができません。それでも来年開かれる COP4 に向けて皆方から私たちのメッセージを伝えたいと思います。私は1963年に生まれて、4年前には水俣病の原因は窒素が流した水銀だと孤独にも窒素も分かっていました。しかし孤独には経済を優先して排水を取れませんでした。人の命よりも経済を優先させました。もし排水が止まっていたら私の被害はなかったかもしれないと思うととても悔しいです。人は間違ったことをすると思います。でもその間違いに気づいたら勇気を持って止めてほしいです。もっとたくさんの国が水銀の条約を批准してください。世界中の国が積極的に水銀を規制してく ください。今、水銀を規制しないと、未来のたくさんの子供たちが私たちと同じような被害を受けてしまいます。港で起きた悲劇を皆さんの国で繰り返さないでください。皆さん、よろしくお願いします。
Heart-rendering message from Minamata. The Pacific has the least number of parties to the Minamata Convention on Mercury, thus exposing the region and its people or her people in these harmful impacts of mercury. Sensing the need to address this threat, SPREP, the South Pacific Regional Environment Program, and some of its member countries approached the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and the Global Environment Facility, GEF, for assistance to undertake the required preparations to join the Minamata Convention on Mercury. In 2018, UNEP successfully secured funding from GEF to support Minamata initial assessments, MIA, to 11 Pacific Island countries that showed an interest. It's been working either directly with the countries or through SPREP to ensure these countries complete their MIAs. Knowing that these MIAs would require funding for implementation, SPREP further secured the Jeff Islands Pacific project early this year in 2021 to provide much needed support to the countries. During the 31st SPREP meeting in September 2021, a few months ago, SPREP presented a proposal to its member countries to develop a regional plan on making the Pacific free from mercury, and congratulations, it was endorsed. The action plan will incorporate all MIAs from the countries and look to map out a way to address all issues identified in them. This afternoon's side event will provide Minamata Convention parties, and we have non-state actors and CSOs in the room, in the Pacific, the first opportunity to provide their input to the regional action plan to be developed by SPREP. But before we go to that discussion, we have a few presentations to highlight the issue of mercury pollution and what is also happening in other regions on what is being done to address it. Our first presenter, Dr. David Evers, is from the Biological Research Institute in the US. It's late at night, but thank you for joining us, David. BRI is SPREP's international consultant that is leading the MIA project for the Pacific. Dr. David has extensive experience in conducting MIAs from around the world, including the Caribbean and the Pacific, and will start us off with a presentation on assessing the impacts of mercury on human and ecological health in the Pacific. He also served on various working groups on the Minamata Convention and has significant contribution to some of the work in the convention. Dr. David, the floor, should I say, or the screen is yours.
I was asked by SPREP to provide a kind of a context or setting the scene. And I've been fortunate to work with SPREP and SPREP's colleagues in 9 different countries on Minamata initial assessments. And it's a big area to provide context, a very large area. All of you know this area very well. I don't as well, but this big area does have a lot of information. And so what I want to provide today is some of that information that is known through publications, scientific publications, and also how can we as a group gather more information to gain more knowledge for this area. And there are 4 different elements that I want to focus in on today. Hotspot mapping, I'll explain that. And then simply fish sampling, bird sampling, then sampling with people. So with hotspot mapping, the idea is to identify contaminated sites. We do this with each of the countries. A lot of times it's landfills. we use GIS layers of landscape features that can create elevated levels of methylmercury. And methylmercury is really the key part here because that's the component or the species of mercury that can get into dietary items like fish that can cause problems from a toxicity standpoint for people. Then we want to generate a model for each island. And then from that model, we can identify mercury hotspots. So when we go in and try to understand contaminated sites, this is what relates to a lot of the work by the Jeff Islands Project to reduce the use and waste of mercury added products. First, a lot of times when we go into a country, we try to characterize the sites, understand their history in regard to mercury, such as landfills. We all need to reduce informal dumping, and especially of mercury added products. So identifying those informal dumping areas is also really important to just understanding the flow of mercury through these systems. And then it is really important to identify where these landfills are connected to aquatic systems. Aquatic systems are the place where methylation can happen at the highest level. Okay, so that's pretty important. Once we can identify these sites, there can be some remediation, hopefully, and then monitoring can also be part of this process. So identifying areas of risk can identify where that mercury leachate can be in both freshwater or saltwater systems. Then we can determine the best suite of bioindicators. They can vary from species that are fixed in the area, species that people eat commonly, or species that are at high trophic levels. Then we can, with that monitoring data, generate mercury concentrations and compare them with reference areas in other areas on an island. So we end up in this model with these different layers. There are GIS layers, there are layers of information that we gather from a computer, from data collection, and from these layers, we can go next to this example of Vanuatu, where we can start to identify where are the areas that are most sensitive to mercury input because of the landscape features. So this ecosystem sensitivity is quite important. So we want to know in your countries, on the islands, where are the places that you need to worry about the most, where methylation of mercury can get into fish that you may eat. So some areas are low and some areas are high. So we think of fish sampling. There's usually 4 different ways of really objectives to think about fish. Fish that are regularly consumed by local communities, seafood that's exported, seafood that can be compared with existing data, and then seafood that can be used for existing interests and linkages with the Minamata Convention. And if we think through those sort of objectives, we can also come up with sampling designs for each of the countries. We're doing that through the MIA process with different countries. And it's a very simple and straightforward process that we worked on around the world. And this straightforward process can help identify and understand mercury in each of your island communities. So a lot of this information relates to where you go for sampling, such as marketer or field sampling. The simple thing is to look at muscle tissue. Identifying species size and dates, very important. So those are sort of parameters that we're looking for. And that information can go into these larger databases that we help oversee with UNEP. This is a database on mercury and swordfish, for example. If we start to look at what swordfish mercury concentrations are like in different ocean basins around the world, we can see the South Pacific here in gray. And then we can see the North Pacific higher up. So there's different concentrations, average concentrations in the same species in different ocean basins. And those different lines mean different things. The dotted red line at 0.48 is the line that the US EPA here in the US has identified as mercury concentrations that are really too high to eat for children and pregnant women. So there's different parts of society that are more sensitive than others. There's different fish species that have higher concentrations than others. And then there's different places in the world where those mercury concentrations can vary. So those are sort of factors that are worth looking into, understanding. The same thing can be done with tuna. There's 7 different species of tuna that are commonly commercially caught. Some of the tuna species that are long-lived tend to be large, tend to have higher mercury concentrations like big-eye tuna and Pacific bluefin. And the species that are smaller tend to be lower mercury concentrations, such as skipjack and albacore. So that's the sort of information we want to gather so we can start to make healthier choices up in the upper right where the green is, or we want to avoid riskier choices where those choices are high mercury, low omega-3s, or the healthier choices up in the green area are high omega-3s and low mercury. So it's a trade-off of how you look at this. And you can see it's not a left-right, on-off sort of view of things. We need to look at this in a gradient. Okay. We could do the same thing with birds. Birds are great bioindicators. They're used by many countries to better understand what's in the system. There's a certain sampling design that can be provided to different countries. They're using this sort of standardized design. And we can do the same thing like fish. We gather concentrations of mercury in different organisms. We can group them up. We can understand what their concentrations are, if they're high or low. These different groups of birds vary from albatrosses to petrels to shearwaters. So we can look at mercury in the field in birds and fish. They're very good bioindicators. And ultimately, we want to look at people. And with people, there's designs that can be made that can better understand how much mercury is in a community. And the mercury in a community is something that we've been able to look at around the world through hair samples. Hair samples are easy to get, they're easy to analyze, and they're somewhat easy to interpret. So hair samples above 1 part per million are above potential safe limits, and hair samples below 1 part per million are fairly safe. So if that's one way of looking at the data, we can see in Oceania, which is the Pacific Ocean, 79% of the hair samples that we've examined so far of a sample size of 308 are above that 1 part per million. And then we can look at this around the world in different continents and in different basins. So this is just to show you there's a lot of information that's available to all of us. This information is accessible from different websites. I have been working with SPREP on generating brochures for different countries for the region to kind of explain this information. And if you do have more questions, you can contact me at this contact email, and I'd be happy to answer any further questions at the end of this, this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you very much for that presentation. To those who've just joined us, welcome again to this deep dive Mercury Free Pacific campaign. And if you want to ask questions, please use the chat box. What we're going to do is just, because we've only got an hour, we'll go through all the presentations, another 3 to go, and then we'll open up for discussion. Our next presenter, I'm pleased to introduce. So David was speaking to us from the US. So we go to Australia now. Dixon is a GEF consultant at UNEP's GEF Chemicals and Waste Unit, working on the Island-Specific Child Project and terminal evaluations of Minamata initial assessments projects in the Asia and Pacific region. He's also the coordinator of the Chemicals and Waste Platform for the Children and Youth Major Group of UNEP, and is on the Australian Youth for International Climate Engagement Working Group with DFAT. So Dixon, welcome. He'll be providing for us solutions for mercury management in the Pacific, and particularly introducing the Islands Pacific Child Project. You have the screen, Dixon.
Amazing. Thanks, Emily. I think I have a PowerPoint for you guys. But let me just start off by congratulating everyone and congratulating the SPREP team for hosting this amazing side event around the Cleaner Pacific RoundTable. And huge thanks to Anthony and Josh for inviting us to come along. And thanks, Emily, just for that generous introduction. And also thanks to the technical facilitators and interpreters who are helping us today. I know that you guys, if everything runs well, no one notices. And if something goes wrong, you guys get noticed. So thanks. And it's also just would like to say that it's an honor to be amongst all of you today and be with this panel. And thanks to all the participants who are here and ready to listen to what we have to say. And thanks for giving us your time. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of Mr. Ludovic Bernarda. He wanted to be here with you today, but due to the time zone difference, he couldn't be here. And so I'm in his place instead. And can we just go to the next slide? So just a bit of background, like Mercury is a mercury, just as David has talked about, right, is a very versatile, very useful chemical, and it's used across the board in very many things. And it's probably one of the reasons why it's so prevalent. It's because it's so useful. Now, it's a toxic metal, but on its own, it's not super toxic. But when it changes form, so things like bacteria, things like microbes will change it to a bioavailable form, which is like something similar to methyl mercury. And these can be bioaccumulated. So when, when food eats, it can grow, it can be amplified through the food chain. And it can impact us and you and I, even though we don't directly have impact with mercury or directly interact with mercury. Our food might be able to be contaminated with mercury. And so this is a global pollutant, and it requires global action. And it can go across borders. Next slide, please. So understanding that in the background, in the 50s, in Minamata, this bay in the south of Japan had a huge amount of mercury polluted in their bays, and it impacted the people for generations to come. And also in the video you just saw at the start, even the babies of people who were lived in the area are now impacted many years down the line. So in 2013, understanding the severity of this threat, to human health, the international community agreed to work together to control mercury pollution through the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And this convention now has about over 100 parties, which is fantastic. So next slide, please. So it started in 2013. But it entered into force in about 2017 in August. So it's hosted by UNEP in Geneva, and it's got now about 135 parties. And where we work, the GEF is one of the main financing mechanisms for this Minamata Convention, all right, to protect human health and the environment from human sources of mercury. And so countries can also access to another financial mechanism. So GEF isn't the only financial mechanism. This is called the Specific International Program for activities that aren't eligible under the GEF. And so next slide, please. So what is eligible under the GEF? So the GEF can fund 3 kinds of activities, 3 enabling activities, and they've got some special rules around them. So the Minamata initial assessments, these are enabling activities that are available to signatories and parties. And what this is we take an inventory of everything all of the mercury in the country, but also the capacity of the country to be able to manage the mercury and be able to ratify the convention so that they can stop and prevent and phase down and phase out mercury in their countries. And then it kind of moves on to the next step, which is the next activity, which is the National Action Plan. Like understanding where your country's at, understanding how much mercury is in the country, we can now move forwards on, how can we fulfill the obligations in this country to phase out and phase down mercury. And these are the plans that the countries will move forwards on into ratifying the convention. And one part of these is the artisanal small-scale gold mining. And that's a really important issue that we touch upon. And last but not least is implementation projects, and that is only for parties, so not for signatories. That's just something that we have to clarify there. And so that's what the GEF does. Let's just go to the next slide, please. And just to do a global assessment of Minamata initial assessments, we're doing at the moment, the Minamata Convention is doing initial assessments across 121 countries, and 65 of them is with us at UNEP. And most of the Pacific is with us at GEF. Next slide, please. And so what we aim to do is that we've run this we run an islands project. An islands project covers the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and also the Pacific Ocean across all of the SIDS in these regions. And one of the child projects of this big program is the Islands Pacific program. And within the Islands Pacific program, there's one component that deals with mercury. And so with what GEF does is that Jeff can only fund Mercury related projects if you're a party and have completed your MIA and submitted that to the Secretariat. So if you haven't done so, you need to get this done as soon as you can, because this project will begin next year. And so we need every party and every MIA, everyone who's doing an MIA with us, to submit those before that, because we can't, as the Jeff agency, we can't fund Mercury related projects without you guys completing the Minamata initial assessment. Next slide, please. And so some possible activities under the Islands project that you guys, that we can run with you through the Jeff and funded through the Jeff are things like the development of the model legislation. So for Mercury, and then this model legislation, you can integrate that into the different countries around the Pacific. We can also fund things like the export and phase out of mercury containing products and wastes. We can also help you establish technical backstopping facilities under this project to deal with healthcare waste management that has a mercury component to it. And speaking of healthcare, the convention currently asks countries at the moment to phase down mercury in the use of dentistry and like dental amalgam. But some member states have put out the proposition to move forwards in COP4 to strengthen the wording to phase out. In this, the Jeff also has a medium-sized project, which is a pilot in Uruguay, in Senegal, and Thailand to phase out dental amalgam. And also with the regional, we can also support regional action plans to phase out mercury across the region of the Pacific. And also through our GGKP program, we can also share best practices across all of the SIDS, across all of the islands projects, not just within this region, but in all of the regions across all of the SIDS. And also one particular area we're working with is PNG, dealing with artisanal, small scale and gold mining. And of course, after they've ratified their convention. Also, just on that note, if a country is not a signatory and hasn't ratified, they need to ratify before coming onto the Islands project. Just how the things work. And so next slide. Thank you for your time and attention. I look forward to what all the other speakers have to say. And I appreciate you giving us this time to speak with you today. I hand back to you, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you, Dixon. Well, that's a very important aspect. You know, people always want to know where the resources are going to come from, particularly the funding opportunities and flows. So we can touch on that in the discussion. Thank you very much, Dixon. Our third presenter and next presenter is Patricia Torre, Opinion True Susa. She will share with us some key highlights from the MIA exercise for PNG for others to learn. Patricia is project coordinator from PNG's Minamata Initial Assessment Project and works with the Conservation and Environment Protection Authority. You have the screen, Patricia.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Emily, for that introduction. And thank you to the Clean Pacific RoundTable Organizing Committee for giving MIA PNG the opportunity to share what we've been doing in our country with regards to mercury. So basically, my presentation will just be a brief overview of mercury and the Minamata initial assessment in PNG. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So presentation outline, background, just an overview of the project, what we've been doing in terms of ratification. The second part will be key findings, some outputs of our MIA project, some significant sources of mercury releases in PNG. That's some of our findings under componentry of the project and some priorities that we'd like to work on after we become a party. So as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, we were not able to sign the convention. We're not yet a party, but we are working towards becoming a party, hopefully in early next year. We are 80% through our government processes, so hopefully by March or April, we can accede to the convention. So our other activity that we've been doing, the Minamata Initial Assessment Project, we had to send a very special request to the JEF Secretariat and UNEP to provide funding for the enabling activity Minamata Initial Assessment Project. So we're fortunate enough, this was approved in 2015. Project agreement was signed in 2016, and we commenced implementation in 2017. It was originally a 2-year project. It has been extended 3 times. The key factor being it took us a really long time to develop our inventory, almost 2.5 years. Next slide, please. So basically the MI project, the goal, protect human health and the environment from the risks posed by unintentional and intentional emissions and releases, unsound use and management of mercury. Our key objective, conduct an assessment of the current mercury situation in PNG, identify the needs, requirements to fulfill obligations of the convention. So key partners for this project, as mentioned by Dixon in his previous, in his presentation, the JEF is the funding mechanism we use for the enabling activity, UNEP, our implementing agency, and the project is being implemented by the government of PNG through the Conservation and Environment Protection Authority. Next slide. So under our MIA, we had 5 key components. As part of component 1, the establishment of national coordination mechanism. We had an inception meeting in 2016. In line with that meeting, we set up the National Coordination Committee for the Minamata Initial Assessment. So we have a committee in place, which was established under this component. The second component was assessment of institutional capacity and legal framework. Under this component, we developed a report on gap analysis on the legal framework and institutional capacity in the country dealing with mercury. And we also used that report to initiate work to develop the draft control and management of mercury regulations under the Papua New Guinea Environment Act 2000. So we have initiated developing the draft regulations for mercury in PNG. So under component 3, we were to develop a mercury inventory release using the UNEP toolkit level 2. Level 2 was quite a comprehensive assessment. Hence, it took us quite a bit of time to establish develop the inventory. And then we had component 4, which is the identification of challenges, needs, and opportunities to implement the MCM in the country for when we become a party. So basically a review of components 1, 2, and 3. And then component 5, drafting and validation of the MI report. So we're almost, I'd say 75% complete. We have a second draft MI report in place. We will look to validate. Once we validate, we can launch, and hopefully that can happen concurrently with our accession process to the Minamata Convention. Next slide. So some key findings of our assessment through the MIA process. The main legislation dealing with mercury management of hazardous chemicals in PNG is obviously the Environment Act 2000. However, there is no specific law that regulates use and management of mercury. So key stakeholders, the Conservation and Environment Protection Authority, MRA, which is the Mineral Resources Authority, and NDOH, the National Department of Health's lack of capacity to monitor, regulate the use of mercury in Asgm, and mercury containing equipment used in the health sector. So findings of our inventory development processes indicated a total of, I highlighted there in red, estimated, because this was a baseline inventory, there's quite a lot of gaps that we still have to fulfill and try to get a more accurate figure. But from the estimations from our initial inventory, from using data in 2018 data, we came up with 528.2 kilograms of mercury being emitted and released into the environment, which is quite high. So from that, an estimated amount of 282.6 kilograms of mercury accounted for 53.5% of total mercury releases and emissions into the environment. This is basically from the use of consumer products, use and disposal of consumer products. Next slide. So some key outputs of the MIA process, as I mentioned earlier, the draft environment control and management of mercury regulations, the first baseline national inventory of mercury releases in Papua New Guinea, which was a big achievement for us because there was no data, no information available. We had to start from scratch. So that was one of our biggest achievements under the project, as well as our awareness raising activities, including partnering with the MRA, PNG, Mineral Resources Authority, and conducting awareness, especially on mercury. So we've been regulars at the alluvial mining trade show conventions within the country. And our draft MIA, hopefully we can complete early next year, if COVID allows. Next slide. So just to give you some idea of our inventory, of the findings of our inventory. So significant sources, as I mentioned, consumer products and other intentional products with and containing mercury accounted for about 53%. That's both use and disposal. Waste treatment itself, 19%, and we have primary metal production for the Asgm sector contributing 25%. So this 25% was only provided by data for 2 sites, which is in Wau, and that's in the Morobe province, and on Misima Island, which is in the Miran Bay province. So of all the sites in the country, just data from the 2 sites already has contributed to a quarter of the emission releases and sources in PNG. So when we do update and more conduct more assessment and develop a more comprehensive and accurate inventory, that figure will definitely increase. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, with the Asgm sector, quite significant in the country, and the unsafe use of mercury by local miners, very evident. Asgm contributed 29% of total mercury releases into the water. It's from 2018 data, and 75% of total releases onto land. So with trade information that we have, it has been established that on average, that 2 tons of elemental mercury that gets imported into the country, mainly for use in the Asgm sector. And you can see in the photograph there, that's usually how they sell it, just at the side of the road at any Asgm sites. Next slide, please. So other significant source, mercury, consumer products and other intentional products with and containing mercury. So most of our consumer products include batteries, medical equipment, thermometers, lighting equipment. So for thermometers, although there is a general phase out of mercury thermometers in major urban centers, rural health centers still use a lot of mercury thermometers. And with the setting of PNG, there's a lot of health centers and clinics out in the rural areas. So there's quite a significant use of mercury thermometers in the healthcare facilities in rural areas. And also, there is an increasing trend, a significant increase in property development, housing projects in the country. So import of and use of lighting sources are quite significantly high. Next slide, please. Mercury waste, another significant source. Mercury waste usually improperly disposed at dump sites throughout the country. So there are no significant stockpiles in the country because most of them are just usually improperly disposed or dumped off at any dump sites. Some healthcare facilities and clinics do try to store mercury waste from broken thermometers. However, most of this do get sold because of the Asgm sector is quite significant in the country. It's also a security risk to try and store mercury waste, especially from thermometers. They usually just get stolen and sold to local miners. In terms of contaminated sites, current sites that we've identified are sites in and around where Asgm activities have been conducted or are currently being conducted. We know that the alluvial mining sector has been around countries for almost more than 100 years, and also all the new dump sites. Next slide, please. So challenges in PNG. I put this up so everyone can just have an idea of what we deal with in the country. As you can see right at the corner at the bottom towards the south, that's Port Moresby, and everywhere else is scattered. The other provinces are scattered all over the landmass. So you'll see I've highlighted, put some figures there. There's some red circles. So the areas marked in red are the areas where there's very significant alluvial and small-scale mining activities. So in my previous slide with the 25% of releases into the environment from the Asgm sector, it only comes from that red circle where it says Morro Bay and Eastern Highlands, and the other red circle just not east of Milne Bay. So those were only two areas that provided their data. So within that inventory, within a 25%, does not cover the other circles that are highlighted on the map. The ones highlighted in blue are areas where Asgm activity is picking up. It's also becoming quite significant. The areas highlighted in green are areas where we also have Asgm activities going on, but not to a significant level. So I've also highlighted, you'll see there are stars. These are just our seaports, our shipping areas. So when we look at, mercury-added products, importing mercury-added products and trying to monitor and regulate them, see, you can have a feel of how scattered these ports are and how much of a challenge it would be for us to try to regulate, control, and monitor imports, mercury-added products coming into the country. Next slide, please. So just as I mentioned, lack of regulation policies with regards to safe use and management of mercury-added products, a lack of infrastructure and capacity to manage mercury waste, a lack of reliable trade data to estimate and monitor imports of MAPS, mercury-containing equipment, illegal trade for when we have the regulation in place, and when we become a party, illegal trade will definitely be a big challenge for us in trying to enforce our regulations, because we also have issues with resourcing within border enforcement authorities such as customs. Lack of information and data available on health impacts of mercury in the country. It's not a lot of studies and research being done in this area. A lack of awareness on mercury use, especially in the Asgm sector. We do have a small-scale mining training center up in Wau in Morobe, but that's just only one site. We have other Asgm sites that relevant authorities such as ourselves and the MRA would still need to reach out to. So there's a lot of awareness that still needs to be conducted with regards to safe use, handling, and proper management of mercury. Next slide, please.
We'll be wrapping up soon, Patricia, please.
Okay, so Mercury Priorities. First and foremost, accede to the Minamata Convention. We saw from the previous presenter, very important for us to accede to the convention, finalize and enact the draft regulations that are currently in place, develop our national action plan for the Asgm sector, very, very important. Update, address gaps in the national inventory of mercury releases in the country. Work with our National Department of Health to ensure that we are developing action plans, guidelines, and policies to phase down and phase out mercury-containing products in dental amalgams and in the health sector as a whole. Conduct continuous awareness, improve our customs strategies to monitor potential importation of mercury-added products, manage mercury waste in an environmentally sound manner, and hopefully we can do that in line with the current draft regulations that we're developing for the transboundary movement of hazardous waste under the Basel Convention. Next. Oh, I think I'm done now.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sorry to be a bit rude, but you know that's the deep dive into what's involved. And wow, oh wow, it's taken 2.5 years. You know, 75% completed, but at least you've got baseline, you've got a draft, you know, report and draft regulation. So thank you for that. Especially after the first presentation of an overview, and then hearing from Dixon about, you know, our assistance that's available, what countries and state parties need to do. So now we go to Joshua Sam from SPREP. In fact, I need to acknowledge Joshua, who's put this whole side event together. Thank you very much, Joshua. Joshua Sam is SPREP's Hazardous Waste Management Advisor and Director for the Pacific Regional Center for the Joint Implementation of the Basel and Waigani Convention. And to talk to us, what we're waiting to hear about is the Mercury Free Pacific Campaign. And you will recall that I had said that SPREP and its member governments had endorsed this regional plan. So Joshua, you have the floor, the screen.
Thank you, Emily, for the very generous introduction. I won't labor on this presentation because in Emily's introduction, she did hint to the campaign, and then Dixon also spoiled my party with some snapshots of what the campaign will look like. So very quickly, let's jump onto the next slide. So this is kind of the journey that the Mercury Free Pacific Campaign has taken. And so as alluded to earlier, we've been helping a few of our member countries develop MIAs. And then while in the process of developing the MIAs, Tony and our previous team members who were here started consulting with UNEP on, you know, because they foresaw that after we complete the MIA, it's good that we're going to tell our members that, you know, this is what they have in their countries in terms of mercury, but what do we do about that? So when they started consultations for the Islands project, they decided that a component of Islands should target what will come out of these MIAs. So that was then taken to UNEP and Jeff review committees, and we were happy to come away with flying reviews, very good reviews from both UNEP and Jeff. So they agreed that islands would address some of the issues that are coming through the MIA. And then we needed the blessing of our leaders in the region, because we wanted to approach this in a regional manner. So we took it firstly to Wegani COP11 earlier this year in September, and then we sponsored that particular paper at the SPREP meeting not too long ago under one of the agendas. I think it was Agenda 8.3. So after getting the blessing of our leaders, we are now here. Today is our first attempt at trying to put together this regional project. For those of you who attended an earlier technical session today, you would have heard from one of our speakers from Sustainable Coastlines. We don't want to do this on our own, and there's been in the past officers at SPREP developing an approach, a strategy, and then taking it to sell it to the members. We don't want to take that approach with this particular campaign. We want you to be with us right from the beginning. So this afternoon, we will give you an opportunity to tell us how you want this regional plan to be developed, so we can create this together from the very beginning until it is ready, developed, and then we can start implementing. Next slide, please. All right, so Dixon already covered what would be some of the activities under the campaign. And so you can see on the screen, these are some of the activities that will make up our Mercury Free Pacific campaign. Next slide, please. All right, and the work on Mercury is quite a complex work, as you would have seen from Patricia's presentation. So we've got some supporting projects that will be helping our member countries on various elements of acceding to Minamata Convention, and we are fortunate enough, like Dixon said, we have MIA Pacific, which is continuing to support our member countries to complete their MIAs quickly, so they can be in a position to accede to the convention. We also have a project with ACP MES from European Union that is supporting especially our parties to attend pre-COPs, COPs, and post-COPs. And then, they will also be assisting our countries to develop capacities to monitor mercury in the environment. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the last slide. Ultimately, this is what the Mercury Free Pacific is aiming to achieve. By 2025, which will be the end of the Islands project, all right? The Islands project will be funding our Mercury Free Pacific campaign. And so at the end of 2025, we want all our member countries in SPREP to ratify the Minamata Convention. We want our region to be free from mercury-containing equipment, material, products. We want to strengthen our ability to monitor mercury in our environment. As you would have seen from David's presentation, mercury is not only anthropogenic, it also has natural sources that enter our food chains. In our vast Pacific Ocean, we need to increase our capacities to monitor that. And we want all our people, all the citizens of the Pacific, at the end of this campaign, to be fully aware of the dangers of mercury. And as is an aim of the convention, we want to make mercury history. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Joshua. So just given the time, we'll go straight into the discussion discussion time, and I recognize Anthony Tony Buluvinaka, Anthony Taloli. He is the acting director for waste management and pollution control program at SPREP. So I'll invite you, Joshua and Tony, if you wanted to lead the discussion. I see some comments in the chat box. Please raise your hand if you wish to make an intervention, and I'll give you the floor. Otherwise, Tony and Joshua, did you want to lead on the discussion?
Yes, thank you. We are happy to lead. What we want to do most importantly is get contributions from SPREP members who are parties, firstly to Minamata, and then those stakeholders as well as partners who have attended to support our strategy. You can send through your thoughts through the chat just to share your experience, some ideas on how we can go about doing this. But just to get things started, to the parties that are online, I see Samoa, Vanuatu, PNG, of course. We've seen, so Samoa has been one of our countries that has led this race. They've ratified to the Minamata Convention. In the MIA report, they've identified phase down and then phase out of mercury containing materials and equipment. And they've also highlighted some other areas. So as we are crafting this regional plan, this is to Samoa, are those the only things that come to mind at the moment, or do you predict in future that Samoa may also be kind of facing some of the challenges that are similar to what the PNG is facing? So you tell us, in terms of crafting this strategy, what do you want us to focus this strategy on in terms of the activities that we should, because mind you, we've already found a funding partner who will fund this strategy, but like Dixon said, we need to come up with this strategy and take it to them, and then we can start getting out of the way. So we need to do this pretty quickly. Thank you, Fia. I can see you online. Maybe the question is yours.
Samoa, did you want to respond? Congratulations again, you leading the race. Or any other parties, Vanuatu, PNG, who are with us?
Yeah, Rosalind from Vanuatu.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, SPREP, for organizing this meeting here. Yes, for Vanuatu, I think a lot of our emissions are also from products that are used, consumer use products. We don't have at this small scale gold mining in Vanuatu, and I think it's very important that we need to be involved in the studies that need to take place, because maybe David can maybe expound a little bit more later, that we can all be exposed to mercury through our diet, through fish, and it's about how we manage waste of mercury in each of our countries. So definitely, for Vanuatu, we would feel that we need to be part of these studies, and we also need to. It's for the countries. I think we all know it's not easy to have collection systems and all that for mercury waste to be to be put in a place for storage until disposal. It's a challenge here for, I think, for Vanuatu, and I'm sure for many countries. So I would think that it's important that these things we need to be supported with this and somehow have some ways to dispose of mercury waste products in each of our countries to minimize the risk for all of us through the risk to affect the human health of our populations in the countries. Yes, so if like we have had here through the JEF project, if many of our countries can finish our MIAs, and maybe from there we can see how we go on from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Patricia, did you want to, oh yeah, you've raised your hand. I can see that. Go right ahead. You're on mute. You can.
Okay, so like for PNG, a key area would be, because this is a new convention and we are looking at trying to monitor and regulate mercury-added products and mercury-containing equipment. A key area we would really appreciate would be training and capacity building for our customs officials, you know, to assist them to identify, you know, what are maps, labeling, HS codes. For example, the data for the inventory that I previously put up, there are a lot of assumptions being made. There are no specific entries from our customs officials in terms of the types of mercury-added products that have come into the country. So a key area would be training, capacity building for our border frontline workers. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There are some comments in the chat. Mr. Charles Brown, I can see your comments there. I think they've been noted, and others, so thank you for using that. But unfortunately, colleagues, our time is up. But we now know who we need to go to, who we want to talk with about this. And we know there's a Mercury Free Pacific Campaign, and Joshua is there, the one who we're all going to scramble to and find out more. But to actually close up with closing remarks, I'm going to invite Mr. Anthony Tony Aloli. You have the floor, sir.
Levu, and thank you very much, MLA. It's very nice to see you and to hear your voice. I think it's been a very wonderful discussion, and I think you've summed it up really well. And I'm sorry to have to take the stage for you at the very end. But I think that, you know, we've had a good discussion, but it's quite short. So please, my plea to the participants and to the countries that are parties and that are looking forward to accede to the Minamata Convention is to forward your views and forward what you want to be included into the strategy or into the Minamata Mercury Free, into the Pacific Mercury Free work plan and the Mercury Free campaign, so that we can maybe work with you to finalize this plan and then get it sorted so that we can get it funded and have it implemented soon. But I want to just to make the point to what you know, was in the comment about what Charles was saying about the accession to the convention and about the limited capacity and the limited land space that we have. And as such, I think the need to prohibit or to ban and to restrict mercury from entering into the Pacific. I think that video at the very start was very touching and very amazing video on the Minamata victims. You know, that really touched me, and they really set the tone of how important, how serious this issue is. It's very nice that we've got an opportunity to fund, and it's not often that we do a plan and there's money waiting to implement the plan. But this is such a case, and I think we should all make the most of this opportunity. And I think with yourself, Emily, who is for the Pacific Coordinator for Mercury Free, World Alliance for Mercury Free for like dentistry. I think that together with important partners like yourselves, we can really work together to make a real impact. And I think towards the end of this project, we can really say that tick a box and say that the Pacific is mercury free. I think that would be a very nice statement at the end of this at the end of this project. So with those few words, I'd like to thank you, Emily and Joshua, and maybe give the floor back to you, Emily, for some final remarks. Thank you.
Pinakavalevu and Faftai Lava to everybody. Thank you to our colleagues in the US who are kind of staking up the night. It's for a change, we in the Pacific are kind of having the control of time. But thank you, PNG, thank you, Vanuatu, thank you, Samoa, thank you to everyone who's with us. Please join the campaign. Thank you to David, thank you to Dixon, thank you for sharing the information and resources. As Tony has said, it's very unusual to have money available. So join the campaign and let's work together. Thank you very much. And we'll see you at the next session of the Roundtable. Vinakavakalevu, God bless you.